Deku is the greatest hero the world has ever seen! Or at least he will be, if he can avoid losing all his powers to the best villain in the series. The end of My Hero Academia is almost here, so now's the best time to look back at how far its many characters have come. To kick things off, we have the evolution of Izuku Midoriya, from scrawny nerd to the world's last hope. Deku's original quirk. Izuku's journey began with a childhood obsession. Like many others, he grew up worshipping All Might, but when he learns that he would never develop a quirk, his dreams of becoming a hero like his idol began to look pretty unrealistic. But after attempting to rescue his classmates Katsuki Bakugo from a villain, a chance meeting with All Might leads to the opportunity of a lifetime. The ailing All Might decided to make the naturally heroic Izuku his successor and the wielder of his quirk, One for All. And after months of grueling physical training, he was admitted into UA, the hero school he always dreamed of attending. At that point, Deku's handle on his powerful new quirk was shaky at best. During UA's entrance exam, he wasn't confident enough to use it until a fellow test taker was in danger, and when he did, it immediately shattered his arm. And this isn't a one-time issue. During his early days at UA, most of Izuku's attempts at controlling his quirk ended in failure. More broken bones and lectures from Aizawa. Though he was as devoted to saving others, sadly his execution was lacking. But, unsurprisingly for someone who has spent his whole life analyzing heroes, Deku has always been good at devising clever ways to defeat villains. Something that came in handy back when using One for All even once resulted in multiple broken bones. We see that especially in the USJ incident, which was his first real encounter with a villain. People downplay Deku's cleverness a bit too much once his quirk starts developing, but he continues to take this to a whole new level as he becomes stronger and stronger. Deku's true power. Everyone knows that the sports festival was a major moment for Deku, but I bet you don't know the real reason why. Sure, it's a great showcase of his resourcefulness and ability to use his head to make up for his weaknesses. But what's way more important than that is the way it changes his perspective on what a hero's job is. Do you remember how insane Deku vs Shoto was at that time? Shoto's much stronger than him, and what's even worse is that Shoto's holding back, vowing to win the battle with only his ice. And as we'll see, Deku would return the favor and disrespect Shoto much more only a few months later. Even back then, Deku didn't want to win against an opponent who wasn't giving it his all. And so winning was no longer his entire goal. He was determined to make Todoroki give the fight everything he had using both parts of his quirk. Eventually, Deku's goading got the better of Shoto, and he ultimately defeated Deku using his fire quirk, an outcome the loser of the battle was satisfied with. One of Deku's most endearing beliefs is that heroes don't just save others physically, that getting through to someone emotionally or psychologically is just as important. Though he never verbalizes this idea outright, we see it pop up a lot in the way he talks about wanting to save villains. This was where it all began. Deku breaks the mold by being as interested in villain redemption as he is in typical hero work. During the sports festival, he saw firsthand how rewarding it could be to fight not only for victory, but for someone else's growth and healing. Because of him, Todoroki was able to get closer to reaching his full potential. But because Deku's own potential was still unfulfilled, he found the perfect teacher to help take him to the next level. Let me do the same for you. Tap your finger where it says subscribe. If not, try clicking on it. Deku's new master. What Deku really needed at this point was to figure out how to use One for All without destroying his body. All Might's former mentor, Gran Torino, would prove to be a slightly more helpful mentor than All Might's, giving him a key insight. Quirks are physiological traits, so he will have more success controlling One for All if he views it as an extension of his body. Though it's simple advice, it increases Deku's understanding of his quirk dramatically. It teaches him how to utilize the flow of a smaller percentage of One For All throughout his body, instead of funneling 100% of its power into a single point. Thanks to this full cowling, Deku is finally able to use it without completely breaking himself. At this point, Deku can finally hold his own in a real fight. First with Stain during his work study, and later when he faces Overhaul. He was only able to safely use full cowling at 100% against Overhaul thanks to Aries' Rewind quirk, but that's nothing compared to what he can do now. The death of All Might. Too much of Deku's identity was wrapped up in his connection to All Might. All Might not only inspired him, but also sent him off on his hero's journey, which is why he would never be the same after the end of All Might. After a career-ending final blow against All For One, All Might gives the watching crowd a vague message. You're next. It sounds like a threat to the villains of the world, but Deku and us fans know that All Might is actually telling his successor that it's time to step up and take his place. No pressure, right? Deku's tears in the aftermath of All Might's retirement says it all. Times were changing, and Deku had to become a fully proficient One For All user as soon as possible. He can't afford to not come into his own as a hero, and quickly. Being the #1 hero is no longer simply his lifelong dream, but a responsibility. So next, he'd be completely focused on growing in power. Deku's new technique. To prepare for the provisional license exam, Deku is tasked with coming up with signature moves using his quirk. But because his ability to use One For All without breaking bones is still limited, he's at a loss, and the recently retired All Might believes that this mental block is because Midoriya is still trying to copy him. But it's a comment from Hatsume Mei that makes him realize that he needs to start thinking outside the box. This is huge for his quirk development. Before, he hadn't looked beyond All Might's punching-based fighting style, but realizes that he doesn't have to fight like All Might to succeed him. So, Deku's big brain, genius-level idea that would change his career forever was to use his legs. Deku's shoot style is kicking-based, which spares his arms from strain. Finding a way to use One For All that doesn't destroy his body makes Deku way more effective as a hero. But that's obvious. Deku realizing he doesn't have to literally become All Might is even bigger. Additionally, Deku is sometimes not the most composed in a crisis, but the provisional license exam showed him how important it is to keep his head on straight, understanding that part of being a hero is making civilians feel secure. Deku's new quirks. Sometime later, Deku unlocked the mysterious vestige world of One For All. This starts with a vision of the origins of the quirk. This doesn't tell him very much, since he already knew the gist of things from All Might, but it reveals that he can interact with the first user, something neither he nor All Might were aware he would ever be able to do. And later in the dream, he is able to see the other 7 users. These apparitions are vestiges of the quirk's past wielders, but Deku is the first user to be able to communicate with them. Not only that, but he will soon be able to use the past user's quirks. Shortly after, Deku lost control of One For All and emitted tendrils of energy, something he had never done before and couldn't stop. Thankfully, Shinso's brainwashing quirk caused him to lose consciousness. And while he was unconscious, he interacts with a former user. The previous wielder's quirks are then revealed to be dormant and growing stronger within One For All. This knowledge alters Deku's understanding of his power. Black Whip would add a whole new dimension to his capabilities once he learned how to control it. He was now set on a linear quirk development trajectory. All Might tells him that the next quirk he unlocks will be Float. So, he'll continue refining his skills with Black Whip so that he can focus on Float when it's unlocked. In fact, he recruits Seto, Uraraka, and Tsuyu to help him train with Black Whip, since their quirks are helpful for the kind of training he wants to do. That willingness to learn from his classmates and their eagerness to help out give us an idea of how his relationships have changed since the beginning of the series. He's grown much more confident in his place at UA. Deku vs Shigaraki. Although he took it pretty seriously, Deku really didn't understand the scope of what it meant to be a wielder of One for All until his fight against Shigaraki during the First War. When Tomura attempts to steal Deku's quirk, he ends up bringing the two inside the Vestige world instead. While in the Vestige world, Deku saw firsthand that All for One had yet to fully merge with Tomura Shigaraki. There were traces of his younger self still present in his consciousness. There, Deku saw the frightened and rejected young boy within who became Tomura Shigaraki, and because of this, he made a decision. The villain, once known as Tenko Shimura, needs to be saved, not defeated. It's the culmination of the lessons he's learned up to this point. His take on heroism has never only been about defeating villains and protecting the innocent. Those ideals find their perfect target in the undeniably evil but horribly mistreated Tomura Shigaraki. There's already a ton of pressure. But then there's the bombshell we received from the previous users. Deku learns the truth. Deku is the final wielder of One for All. Probably. If a user already has a quirk of their own when they inherit One for All, their lifespan is shortened dramatically by the strain of possessing multiple quirks. Deku and All Might, who are both quirkless, don't face this side effect. But with the shrinking number of quirkless children being born, it's unlikely that Deku will ever find someone to pass the power onto. The fact that he's now able to have such complex interactions with the Vestiges shows how much he's been able to make the quirk his own. But it also shifts how Deku views himself. He can't see himself as a quirkless kid who got lucky anymore. He has a vital role to play that no one else can take responsibility for. That's a heavy realization, and one that Deku reacts to the same way All Might used to, by playing the lone wolf. But we'll get back to that in a minute, because first, we have some quirk developments to look at. Deku's biggest power-up. Deku's power is growing much faster now. After the war, the percentage of One for All that he can safely use has shot up from 5% to 45%. He's mastered Black Whip, and he has now unlocked the 6th user's Smokescreen, the 4th user's Danger Sense, Shimura Nana's Float, and the 3rd user's Fajin. He uses them all in a fight against his old enemy, Muscular. Last time, defeating Muscular took everything he had and more. This time, he took him out with a single punch and didn't even break a sweat. Yeah! Later, Deku teamed up with All Might, Endeavor, Hawks, and Best Jeanist in an attempt to draw out One for All and Shigaraki so he could deal with them once and for all. At this point, Deku, without even being a pro-hero, is the equal and colleague of those he once idolized. Not to mention, he's also the most powerful member of that group. Oh, and he's only been a hero in training for less than a year. Yeah, he's pretty overpowered. However, realizing how powerful he is and how much only he is capable of doing made Deku's insistence on doing everything by himself much stronger. He left UA to hunt down Shigaraki without endangering his friends. When All Might tries to encourage him to take care of himself, Deku coldly leaves him behind. I mean, plenty of fans still haven't forgiven him for throwing away that bento. How unimaginable would that have been before the war arc? Rejecting the strong bonds he's formed with others, Deku's new approach to hero work seems to be running him into the ground. Deku surpasses everyone. Deku had to be dragged back to UA unconscious by his classmates. But that's not because they knocked him out or anything. In fact, despite bringing no harm to anyone in Class 1A while they tried to capture him, an already exhausted Deku easily defeated them all at the same time. He only passed out because he'd been hunting All for One and fighting his minions for several days with no breaks, and only after accepting the words of his friends. Deku has now truly learned to put faith in others. All Might didn't learn this lesson until after his career was over. Deku no longer shoulders the burdens of the world. He's okay with letting other people do their share. They'll power of friendship their way out of this or die trying. Shigaraki's personality is separating from All For One again, and All For One clearly isn't very happy about that. So for Deku to make good on his desire to save him, something drastic has to happen in a very short window of time. Deku's outlook will be proven right or wrong by the outcome of his final clash with Shigaraki. I'm Anthony Fan, thanks for watching.